as the world fell. Each of us, in our own way, was broken. It was hard to tell who was more crazy, me or everyone else. Hey guys, back again for another video on Furiosa. So this is my second video about the symbolism, both the mythological and the sort of historical symbolism and references that you find in this movie and in Fury Road as well. If you haven't seen the last one, please go back and check that. You can find that in the description of this video. And of course, before I go any further, plenty of spoilers for Furiosa and of course Fury Road if you haven't yet seen. So in the last video I talked about the scene where Dementus ends up coming across a war boy with a stick in his head asking if it's Valhalla. It's meant to be a kind of comedic scene, and at some point somebody gets a hold of a flare and fires the flare into the ground, and Dementus is covered in red. You know, beard, hair, goggles, cape, everything. He then becomes Red Dementus. And as the war boy points Dementus in the direction for the Citadel and not the green place of many mothers, which is what he's actually looking for, he comes across the Citadel and he finds a bunch of people who are, not living so well. They're living sort of at the bottom, downstairs, sort of a little bit outside the Citadel, and they are poor. They are sort of the great unwashed, the great masses who don't have very much because, of course, Immortan Joe and his allies, including the People Eater and the guy heading up Bullet Farm, whose name I don't know, they're the ones who are really controlling the water and everything else. And Red Dementus, and he's introduced as Red Dementus, then begins making a speech. Now, in my last video, I mentioned that, this could represent Red Dementus as the Populares, the Roman faction that appealed more to the plebeians, the sort of the common folk in Roman society, as opposed to the Optimates, who were the aristocracy. But, there's another way to interpret this, and it's much more sort of historically relevant today. This is really modern history now that I'm about to talk about, which is that if he's Red Dementus and he's making a speech saying, hey, those guys at the top, they get to control everything and they get to tell you what to do. But if you follow me, Red Dementus, then I will work in your favor, and I will distribute things a bit more fairly. Then really this looks more like a sort of a communist or a socialist reference. And I thought it was a bit sort of on the nose. I really couldn't help but notice it. I think that this is kind of, it's brought home by the fact that when you look at the People Eater, and he's quite often the one that's kind of negotiating with Dementus, not necessarily Immortan Joe directly, but I think it's quite telling that the People Eater, who's the kind of the bald guy with the metal nose, is wearing a sort of a suit, a blazer with a waistcoat on. You might call it a vest in the US, and that he's dressed something like a kind of typical capitalist figure that you might see in sort of 20th century socialist or communist propaganda. I thought that was very interesting. I thought it was quite telling as well that what Red Dementus seemed to be doing in this case was trying to sort of create a cult of personality around himself as this kind of savior of the poor and the downtrodden, and that he was going to make everything better by distributing things a little bit more fairly. So after Dementus ends up using the war rig, the shining and chrome, really beautiful looking war rig, to as a Trojan horse to break into Gastown and then to open the gates, after killing the guards and then taking over Gastown. He actually takes over Gastown and then rolls up to the Citadel as Red Dementus and begins making demands now of Immortan Joe and his allies. And Dementus ends up saying something like, I want to, it was either doubling or an increase of 50% of the milk and the water
and the food. So it's quite interesting that while you're watching this movie Furiosa, I'm kind of learning about the economy of the Wasteland. It's kind of hinted at in Fury Road, where you have Gastown, Bullet Farm, and the Citadel, but in this is much more explicit that milk, water, and food come from the Citadel, and of course Gastown, gasoline, petrol, gas comes from Gastown, and Bullet Farm is pretty self-explanatory. But what I thought was very interesting is that when Dementus rolls into the Citadel after he's taken over Gastown, and he starts making demands, and he says, I want a whatever percentage increase, 50% increase, doubling of all of these resources. The people eater kind of rolls up looking like this in his suit, and there's some weird thing going on where he has these changeling to his nipples, but we'll gloss over that. The people eater says, no, it's not possible. It's not possible for them to increase the amount of milk and water and food coming from the Citadel. And I thought that it was kind of implicit in what he was saying, that, hey, if we try doubling that or what have you, then this system that we've got, this economy that we've got between Gastown and the Citadel and Bullet Farm is going to break down. But of course, when Dementus is making these demands, he's not making them for himself, or at least that's not the way he's putting it. He's saying that he needs it for the people and that it's not enough for them. Now, of course, as the movie progresses, it becomes pretty apparent that Dementus, he's not going to be happy with just taking over Gastown alone. And of course, he makes a play for the Citadel as well. And Furiosa and Praetorian Jack, when they show up with a war rig at Gastown to get a delivery, to take a delivery of gas, they barely make it out of there alive. A bunch of the war boys get killed. They have to leave because there's an uprising in Gastown. Now, whether or not that's something that's engineered by Dementus, or whether that's just because he's not capable of keeping everyone in check or keeping everyone happy, and the increase in water and milk and food that he should have gone is either not going to those people, or he's just not particularly good at distributing it, or what have you. But Dementus then of course begins making more demands and sends a message back with Furiosa and Praetorian Jack for even more resources from the Citadel. And so, what exactly is Nikola Thoris and George Miller trying to say now in this? What is it that they're getting at? Is it some criticism of communism or socialism or cults of personality, or is it just a bit more sort of, it's not so pointed as that? Maybe it's just that that Dementus is just the kind of guy who, will use whatever he can to get the power. If that means appealing to the masses, by being Red Dementus, then that's what he's going to do to try and build up his own power and take over Gastown or take over the Citadel or what have you. I've also mentioned the Populares and the Optimates in my last video. Is he trying to say that the likes of, say, Gaius Julius Caesar, who himself actually was a Populares, was it that even the Populares themselves were not necessarily, on the side of the plebeians? Is it a coincidence that, Dementus is red, he's Red Dementus, and he seizes Gastown, he seizes the means of production? Is it a coincidence then that he then tries to seize the other means of production, including the Citadel? I don't think that these are coincidences at all. I think that Nikola Thoris and George Miller are, making some pretty explicit sort of historical references, and what that really means, what they really meant, who's to say what exactly they were trying to say there. But I thought that as a big fan of history, it was quite interesting to see those sorts of historical references, modern history in this case, rather than the ancient stuff that I mentioned in the last video. Having said that, I just wanted to know, did you guys notice these references yourself? What did you think when you saw them? Did they mean anything to you? What do you think that George Miller and Nicholas Royce were trying to say in these sorts of references? Are there any references, more historical, modern historical references that I've missed as well? Please, let me know. Pop us a comment and let me know what it is that you think. I've already made some videos on Fury Road, and of course this is my third video at this point on Furiosa. So you should be able to see some videos on the screen right now that you can click if you'd like to see more videos on Fury Road or Furiosa. Beyond that, guys, thanks ever so much for getting to the end of this video, and have a very nice day. Goodbye.